Excited about this type of panel being here today because the goal for our panel is to talk about things that we heard throughout the morning and kind of crystallize what you think some of the issues are so that as people leave here, they're like, oh yeah, I heard somebody say that and then now I get the significance of it. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a softball question, which is, given everything we've heard today, what is the definition of attribution? Why do we not know that? And where are the vagaries in that? Seems kind of clear to me, but every time we go out, someone's like, whoa, you have to say what attribution really is. I'm like, what? Go ahead.
I guess I'll start. I think one of the reasons maybe because we all come from different industries, and just naturally we all have different things that we call certain things. I think I'm less concerned about what we call attribution. I think most people, analytic professionals, at the end of the day, will talk to each other in terms of marketing mix, issues. What is going on with multi-touch attribution? So for me, that's less of an issue. But essentially, the way we view it, and which I've heard it most often in CPG, is digital attribution. We refer to more of things like multi-touch attribution. So things that are more consumer-centric analytics. And we just typically call marketing mix the marketing mix. We usually separate the two. It sounds like here, it's usually joined together.
What do you think?
Yeah, I fully agree. We really observe a lot of confusion when it comes to terminology. And like two of the sources that we see in the conversation with our clients on this type of questions is, one is a methodological one. Yeah, so people refer to different methods with different names, and they actually don't really know which kind of methods are out there and which names they carry. But then also a scoping question. So what type of attribution challenges or business challenges are we actually solving with attribution? Like an attribution, I like the word. The word itself just means you give credit to an activity or an instrument according to its fair contribution to an ultimate success event. Now that's attribution. We should always have called it attribution, but we didn't. It ran under marketing mix modeling or different names. But how attribution today is actually used is a very specific way to answer that question. Yeah? There are many others. There are heuristic approaches, there are econometric approaches, simulation techniques. They've always been there. So in a way, there have always been attribution methods. Now, they just haven't been called attribution. And this is a bit the confusion that we see, and people really talk about different things. Like last week, I was called by a client, and he said, hey, Thomas, can you look at our attribution model? And what do you think? And I was expecting, obviously, a very fancy, modern, multi-touch, consumer level type of thing. It was a very plain vanilla econometric model. They just called it attribution because things today are called attribution. And so there is a lot of confusion. I think we could really benefit from a common terminology.
Yeah, I think we get a little bit lost in some of the vagueness of the language a lot. I kind of like to parse it out between the informal, the lowercase a attribution, which is the kind of practice and philosophy and the ideal that we're trying to achieve, and then the uppercase attribution, the formal data science, and the actual tool and product and what we're trying to accomplish. I think what sets it apart for me, as far as attribution goes, we've always, as marketers, tried to tell stories to the right person, in the right place, at the right time, with the right message. Attribution is really our way of telling people how we're measuring, how we're doing. And I think where we've started to focus as an industry is that story is in service of allowing us to write the next chapter, of looking forward. So it's a way to benchmark our progress and then set a compass towards what happens next. I think that's what we're trying to do with it. With some of the more focused data science-driven digital attribution, multi-touch attribution technologies, it's very focused, it's very tactical. And I think econometric modeling allows us to start to think about, if we parse those two things apart, we start to think a little bit more strategically, how we start to invest across channels, how we start to answer larger business questions. So I think there's roles for everything within the big attribution, the lowercase attribution. And then as we come up with more and more attribution tools, we can formalize approaches and standards.
So you think there's a place for both market mix model and attribution? And do you think when people say MTA, multi-touch, they're talking about digital? I'm kind of getting that sense. Because I always think cross-platform, but I don't think that's right.
Currently, they mostly do.
Yeah,
I would say.
So MTA is digital.
Digital, yeah.
But I would say there is clearly a room for both. Actually, as it stands right now, there is, I think, even a need for both. Because classical, like econometric approaches, typically, as you said, answer more the high-level question. What's the overall contribution to a business objective in light of all the control variables, be it like external factors, but also other commercial levers like promotion, price, distribution, whatever it is. And typically questions you answer more on a, be it a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual level. Yeah? And MTA, or whatever we call attribution on a more granular level, gives you really the insights on a more granular level, single digital placement, more real-time and more tactical. Yeah? And I think those approaches go hand in hand. If you only do the one, you don't get the full granularity. If you only do the other, you're actually doing it wrong because you don't control for a bunch of factors that you don't have in your multi-touch attribution model. So I would say where the science currently stands, you're well advised to combine both, and that's one of the challenges where many of our clients are struggling with. I know there are vendors out there, and some of them are here who developed integrated approaches, and I see them at some of our clients, and we're getting there, but far from being a well-adopted practice, I would say.
If I can mention, just to reflect on today and this morning, I like some of the comments that was made by the Mobile Marketing Association when they referred to, MTA is the best way to measure your digital activations. I agree with that. You can't optimize digital without having granular level results, right? The publisher placement creative. But that still does answer different business questions that your marketing mix does. I think that like all research we do, right, throughout our jobs, there is no one piece of research that you can say everything has to be done under this one umbrella. So you can have them work together, just all different business questions, which I think one of the other people mentioned this morning, one of the first panelists, that says, the business question of, from an overall investment standpoint, what drives your business? Yes, your marketing mix modeling is what's going to answer those questions. But in terms of how do I optimize my digital, that's going to be your MTA.
I think, to build off of that a little bit too, and there's a lot of confusion, right? So you mentioned the Mobile Marketing Association presentation this morning, and I noticed when he showed the chart about the survey saying what's important to you, number one was measurement and attribution. Number two was effectiveness and ROI. How are we parsing those differently?
Right. I wondered about that too. Greg. Okay, so are we just completely blowing the minds of brand managers who finally, 200 years later, figured out econometric modeling and its impact on their business? And now we're saying, in addition to having a PhD in that, you also have to have a PhD in attribution. How can this stuff really be operationalized? And how can people really gain the level of understanding they need to in the industry?
It's an interesting question because we were probably asking the same question about 70 years ago when radio came out, right? Probably the same question when TV came out. I think a lot of the brand managers today are probably millennials. They probably, throughout college, was using social media. So I don't think the gap is as big as we think it is. There's obviously a learning curve. And it is a stretch today. I think that's the organizations that are going to be most successful are the ones that can help shape their talent to incorporate that. But I don't think it's so far-fetched that they have to be data scientists. I think they have to understand some of the basics around the methodology. I think they need to be able to apply it accordingly, but I don't necessarily think that they have to be data scientists to make it work.
To push back on it, though, they'd have to have a fairly high level of understanding and say, that doesn't make any sense to me, instead of, thank you for the 1.5.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be argued we expect too much out of a marketer, right? And that's some of the things I think some of the support functions are there to do to help close some of those gaps. I don't think that I would recommend that a brand manager needs to have a statistics degree to operate their jobs. I think they just need to know from a high level some of the methodologies so they can help incorporate it. But I don't expect them necessarily to be so ingrained into the data because that's essentially, from at least a brand side, that's what my job is, right? To help support that and guide their thinking, but also them to kind of understand some of the basic principles.
In order to build on that, in order to make that possible, both like central centers of competence at a client, but also external vendors supporting in that space, need to hide away the complexity a bit and move towards really user-friendly, decision-making minded support solutions that really help in the geographies, in the categories, in the brand, so that a brand manager can really work with it and has the decision support at his or her fingertips. Otherwise, we'll see probably adoption problems as we've seen with MMM. I'm still puzzled that still many clients actually even most clients we're working with don't really adopt econometric modeling, which is meanwhile a well understood technique to its full potential. Yeah? And this would be well understood and not even priced in a way that you couldn't do it. And I don't think we should fall into the same trap with digital attribution modeling.
I think we all have a marketing mindset on, but when we look at it, either within the client or within the vendor partnerships that we have, if we widen the stakeholder pool a lot, everybody's trying to grow the business, whether they're in pricing or whether they're in some other function of the business. And one of the points I liked that Nigel made this morning from MMA was that by talking to people who were doing staffing and by talking to people who are doing asset management, they were able to start to get different data streams. And so, I know certainly within our agency, one of the things that we fight is this idea that data is not my job. And so I think one of the best things that we can do is to start to educate people that data is your job. You have data, you have questions that data can answer. It might not be relevant to everybody's question, but if you make data a little bit more of your purview on an everyday basis, you can contribute to grow the basis, whether you've got a marketing hat on or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. You may have the best view into the media planning and buying process. Where are the insights from market mix modeling or attribution? Where are they really deployed at the agency? And does it guide it to the degree that it did a while ago? Just sort of the sledgehammer came down and said, "Here's your plan."
Yeah, it's a great question because every client is different. We're all special, unique snowflakes, and we have to treat ourselves and our clients as such. So I wouldn't say it's the same answer for everybody, but I will say in general, one of the things I've seen is, to your point about how it's still not necessarily widely adopted, and there are a lot of people that don't use it, even though it's a commonly accepted tool. I think it started to gain acceptance from what I've seen in my exposure. When I first started working in media and advertising, it was the thing that we got together once a year and everybody opened the binder, and when we got to the end, you close the binder, you put it on the shelf. Half the room agrees to disagree, and everybody leaves until the next year's presentation. Now it's a lot more integrated into discussions and how we do it. And for some clients, it gets up front, and it's part of the planning process, and we have certain goals that we need to meet. And it's represented on the flow chart in some ways. And in other places, it's more of a benchmark that we need to try and talk about. In other places, it's purely a data transaction. One of the things that Sean Lever said is, why can't we have the marketing data? We give a ton of marketing data to our clients, right? We spend a lot of time and information curating and collecting and collaborating that data for our clients because we want to know those answers too, because we're also on the hook to deliver business results. So I think, again, it varies, but I think there is a slow and steady progression of acceptance of modeling as a really common and important part of how we measure success.
Okay, here's one of my most unfair questions. Aren't you, as an agency person, the wolf guarding the hen house? And you must hear that. Is that the fox?
Yes, the fox guarding the hen house.
I don't know. What do you have to say about that? Because you do modeling work for the clients.
I will say that I certainly respect that point of view, but I'm also a lot closer to the business than a third-party modeler, right? So a great example, and not specific to one client, is we'll get a model that comes back to us, and you have got to spend more money in Network Prime. Great. Okay, I have a limited budget. I've spent as much as I can in Network Prime. Maybe I'm locked out of a particular day part or a sports sponsorship because a competitor has that. There are market realities that a lot of models don't necessarily consider. So one of the reasons that we do modeling is because we understand the marketplace, and we can actually start to build hypotheses and models that account for the realities of the marketplace.
Do you have your own in-house, or you work with a couple of providers?
We do work with our media agencies as well as third-party providers, and we do obviously our own internal proprietary research on occasion. I think we don't really rely on one data point. We do try to kind of triangulate a few different things. So we do appreciate the work that our agency does, and we continue to do that, as well as use other supplemental research as well to do other modeling and work.
So wait, did you just tell me that you have like 3 or 4 different evaluations of the exact same plan going on?
They work differently though. There's some synergies obviously, but for instance, our media agency would do really well in terms of flighting, right? They would do a lot of the modeling as it relates to how can I best flight my TV execution. But we would do the things that actually are ROIs, right? Because that's something that we feel passionate about, making sure that we do have third parties that monitor the ROIs across the different channels and providers. So they do modeling. It's not necessarily the same exact model of what we do, but they all kind of work together in a way that, right, your flighting may represent what you're seeing within your ROIs. So yeah, we do try to triangulate because there is advantages, right, to having working closely with your media agency as well.
Yeah. And just to kind of build on that, I don't have any problem working with third-party modelers, right? But if we're all kind of equal stakeholders at the table, and we can put our input in, and we can kind of guide, this is how this data should be read and should be used, and should be defined. It's a lot cleaner process for everybody. We want to measure just as much as anyone else does. So yeah, I mean collaborative, and I think you mentioned specific tasks for specific partners is a great approach to that too. So. It's not so much about the fox in the hen house so much as it is about making sure that every hen is counted.
And if I may add to that in fact, you might now expect the strategy consultant to say, independent perspective, difficult situation, agency. But actually the biggest problem we see here is often is that clients don't fully share data with agencies. So what agencies come back with as a model isn't like the type of model you really want. So it's a bit, it's more like a content analytics problem than it is really the agency wants to fool the client in many situations.
Yeah, I remember reading a JAR article about how much better media planning would be if the advertisers shared their goals and their experiences with the agencies. Like, that's just insane, right? I mean...
Yeah, at the end of the day, everybody wants to build their brand over time and their sales overnight, right? So understanding what those KPIs and where you want to get to first really helps define a measurement plan for everything else. And that measurement plan can include the methodology, but also just basic strategies and tactics that you want to approach the marketplace with.
So this morning we heard a lot of interesting hurdles. We learned a lot about some people's accomplishments in this area. Was your takeaway from the morning made you feel more positive, less positive, or about the same as you did about attribution modeling as when you came in?
I mean, there's a lot of challenges, right? And the challenges are consistent sometimes across industries, sometimes they're different. I think the solutions will come in time. I think that obviously everybody, like you mentioned, wants to grow the dollar overnight. And it's working towards the right direction, right? Something like for CPG, multi-touch attribution really wasn't around that much a few years ago. Now it's really taken off because the databases have gotten bigger and things like that. So I think as an industry, one way to help simplify a lot of the issues is not putting so much emphasis around, for instance, the data science, which obviously is hot today, right? And the models have gotten so much better, and that's what a lot of times what we talk about. But I think what has also slowed down a little bit was the business side of the analytics and how to apply a lot of the principles. So, for instance, the NPS score that was negative 28 probably is not because of the capability or the methodology. Is probably an opportunity for both vendors and internal stakeholders to work together to try to package information up, make it more actionable. What can the stakeholders digest a little easier so that way things are moving along? I think that we're actually farther along than we think. We just want to get there faster. We want to do more now. And I think that there's more available than we think. We just need to put more of a business cap on and saying, what do we really need? Let's stick to more of the foundational questions we want to answer. And I think somebody else mentioned it this morning or actually I think a panel or two ago, that said, what can we activate on? How, it's great to have data as fast as it comes, but if you can't, necessarily, if your organization isn't built agile enough to be able to take those learnings, then you just have unhappy stakeholders, right, with negative 24 NPS.
Right. What do you think, Thomas?
Look, I think it's important to raise all the questions and to have this open discussion. what we often see at our clients and what doesn't really work is like secretism about our algorithms and black box mentality. It didn't work with MMM. It doesn't work with digital attribution. So open exchange to really enhance the field. I think this is what the discipline needs right now, and not only from the practitioners, but I would also hope that academia picks up the topic more. So really opening the black box, open discussions about the approaches, what works best, is what will help ultimately not only develop the content and the analytics, but also the adoption rate in the industry and the buy-in by marketers. Yeah.
So you think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you think we're having a pretty good understanding of the challenges and sort of like the frailties of the current system right now?
I would say the challenges are understood, but it's a very dynamic still discussion on where the target picture will be.
Okay. Okay. Adam, what did you hear this morning? Did it make you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutral?
I'd say overall I'm a little more optimistic because I'm hearing a lot of the same concerns that both I have and my clients have and my partners internally have echoed in the room. So I feel like at least we're all rowing the boat in the same direction. I don't know how far it's going to be, how long it's going to be before we get there. But it's about asking the right question so that you can make the right decision. It's not just about measurement. So I'm hearing that echoed a lot. I'm hearing a lot about data and tech and marketing tech. And I'm one of the things that I've kind of been thinking about a lot lately is there's this almost implicit bias when you hear the word data that it also implies automation. And what I'm hearing is that the automation isn't there yet, and we need to invest in technology. We need to invest in resources to do that. And the other thing that I'm hearing is everybody's kind of experiencing some of the same misgivings about what the right thing to do is, but we're all plugging forward on it, right? So I don't necessarily feel like we're in any better state, but I feel like we're all concentrating on the same things.
I'm going to ask you guys, are you feeling better or worse about attribution? And this is a good time to ask a question. We've got a lot of time for you to interact. We have a management consultant, we have a client, we have an agency person. All our experts are here. Alice, how did you feel about the morning? I'm actually a little disappointed to have learned that attribution right now is really about digital, because I really want it to be about all the channels, and I really want us to deal
It
with.
is currently about digital, but it shouldn't really be only about digital in the
I know.
future.
And that
no?
was exactly what I was going to say.
Was it? Good. Okay.
Exactly what I was going to say is, gosh, guys, I thought a couple years ago it was about digital, but I thought we'd moved forward. I mean, a couple years ago the conversation was, well, if it happens in a digital world, like you only have to worry about the things that happen in the digital world. You don't have to worry about price and, store features and all those kinds of things that we know matter. No, because we're in a digital world. But I thought attribution had moved out of the digital world, and so I'm kind of disappointed that we're still stuck there. Do you think we are? I mean, I certainly
In terms
am
of
trying not to be. I mean, we do a lot of work with lots of other media, but we don't also call ourselves attribution. We call it sales effects. So I don't know.
I think stuck's the wrong word. I think that it's a journey, right? And we don't want it to be only digital today, but that's where the big data exists, is with digital, right? So
That's
at least
not true.
So let me give you an example from a CPG perspective. We just don't have TV, right, inside the panel to do multi-touch attribution, right?
That's not true. We do. We have lots of TV data.
Leslie's from NCS.
Right, so we use NCS and for a lot of the
Right,
work.
so we
and
have
I can tell you,
yeah, we
Turn
have
her mic
radio
off, right?
and we have magazines and we have, so
the
there's a
current
lot of
solution
data.
that we use for MTA does not have TV within the NCS database to run multi-touch attribution. We'd love it to, right? We're using the system. We don't have the panelists into the system except for the OTT that's in there, which is about 4 or 5 million households. It's just not enough to run the models that we need at our businesses.
Plus, if you go outside the US, which I come from Europe,
I would
so
love
you
to
have
be
a
outside the
whole, a
US.
whole different discussion about
Yes.
you have a whole different discussion about integrating non-digital touchpoints. No, I'm completely with you. I think in terms of aspiration,
Yeah.
I'm completely in the camp that attribution is really about covering all allocation questions and attribution questions that you can potentially have. And under that, you need an integrated ROI framework. that makes best use of all kind of techniques, because there is not one cookie cutter technique, including digital multi-touch attribution, including heuristic approaches, where you need them, including econometric modeling, including maybe even survey-based approaches to completely come from a marketeer point of view and decision-making mindset. This is the decisions that I have to take, and this is the best way I can take those decisions. But if you ask me how people today, what they associate with attribution, then I think we're too much stuck still in like a narrow frame.
Do you think so it's not just the word attribution? It's not just what we're calling it? It's also what's really prevalent.
Yeah. Yep, next question.
I consider the really advantage of digital attribution relative to media mix is the ability to target precisely. Okay, so a little over a year ago, something hit the press. Procter & Gamble was doing something, I presume, from an attribution result, targeting, and it didn't work so well. And I think their statement of the lesson is targeting without reach doesn't work so well. I'd just like to see what your comments are about that.
Adam, take it. Hyper-targeting to the detriment of the brand.
Hyper-targeting and reach and frequency and flowcharts and beating year-ago TRPs and total media weight and competitive share of voice. They're all factors that we've really got to consider. I think if it's an experiment to understand whether hyper-targeting with digital tactics can actually grow a piece of business, that's great, but you've also got to consider the scale too. So reach does have to be a factor, because if you're narrowing your audience down to the point where they're the only people that you're talking to, I think that you can't expect to grow your business with a fraction of the audience that you used to be talking to at scale. So there does have to be a little bit of a trade-off. I feel like I'm hearing I don't know, I'll just say it. I feel like I'm hearing a lot of questions about brand metrics from my clients these days, and brand equity questions and awareness questions, because they're afraid that they're losing some of the efficient waste of mass reach vehicles by increasing their spend in digital. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think that is some of the gut level reaction that I'm hearing when I'm hearing questions about about brand metrics for clients. I didn't used to hear those questions as much as I do now. There has to be some scale. You have to start to think about universes too, right? And you have to start to think about the number of universes you can combine together. Because if I really dissect reach, I can get 100% reach against a narrow target. But what is my actual target? What am I planning against? What am I trying to buy against? I think there's also a disconnect that happens somewhere along the process between the beautiful, wonderful, really invested targets, like for an auto. Let's say I want, George lives in Southern California and changes his own oil and drives a compact car and will only consider foreign. And then I go buy auto intenders. So I'm building flowcharts and plans and TRPs in one direction, and everybody's buying in on it. It's not just agencies, it's clients, it's partners, it's whatever. Somehow there's a disconnect. And then how do we start to build those universes and start to think about reach in a way that, if I'm hyper-targeting 10 people, I'm not going to grow my business. If I'm hyper-targeting 10 people at a time, 100 times, I'm going to do a lot better.
Okay, so my follow-up question is, how do we get the brand into attribution modeling? Especially when it seems to me that the clients have diminished their brand trackers. But people are not doing that as much anymore, right? So no wonder they're asking you, Adam, because they don't know. What do you think? How do we get the brand into this?
As far as involvement, like as part of the process, I think engaging them throughout.
No, I mean the real brand, like the goodwill and the equity, the brand equity, the strength of the brand that caused all this stuff to happen in the first place. How is that reflected mathematically, I guess?
Brand equity. Well, I mean, it'll depend on the category. I don't think there's one methodology that you can kind of.
I
say
hate that
no.
answer.
But that's the truth. It's the truth. You know, if there was one answer, I think everybody would be doing it. You know, right now, there's always ways, right, to try to assess anything. You know, there's been a lot of studies that I've seen that try to combine a lot of the brand health metrics with that. In fact, you can do that even with multi-touch attribution, right? You can just through creative kind of project design, you can put studies on top of that, and where you can run your MTAs and then also do self-reported surveys around a lot of those users, right? So there's creative things you can do, but it does depend, unfortunately, on some of the categories dynamics. Yeah.
Sorry.
I think people are still measuring their brand. They definitely are. But the pace of overall data has increased to the point where a brand study twice a year or once a year used to be good enough. But now I'm running models on daily or weekly data. And I don't have brand data at the same pace that I have all my other data.
And the big risk is, if I may build on that, because I'm a big fan of integrated ROI frameworks. So for me, like the impact on brand, which if you want is nothing else than economic impact just later on, should be somehow part of an integrated ROI framework. So and even if you don't get with multi-touch attribution immediately to an answer, you need to figure that into your framework. And maybe it's econometric modeling that helps you, modeling of brand KPIs, modeling of base over time. So there are different approaches. But again, coming back to the point, I'm convinced that you need to blend different methods to come to a comprehensive answer. Because if you really want to optimize your both budget size and allocation to instruments and tactics in a proper way, you need to include the longer term effect. And I think this is in fact one of the biggest challenges.
Oh my gosh, we're out of time. But go ahead, Karen.
One quick question. And it's about what we've heard this morning and now, which is not about what your media partners provide to you. So for instance, I would say about 95% of all the RFPs, and I'm from Time Inc., by the way, so welcome to the stage, but 95% of all of our RFPs are about what kind of ROI methods or measurement are you going to put in place to prove the value of the advertising with Time Inc. What I didn't hear, which does concern me, is where that fits in and how that's being used. I guess it's a question and a comment.
Well, I would say coming back to my earlier point, it's all about which kind of management decisions you want to inform. And this is the first question. And then you only get to which kind of analytics do you want to use to inform those questions. Yeah? And that would be, from my perspective, always the starting point. And that's actually the questions that we hear from our clients. And that's a mindset shift, I think, the experts working in this area, or at least some of them, still need to take more, coming less from bottom-up what's possible with data analytics, but more coming to what's required really to answer a business question, and then blending what you can do with big data, but also with different approaches, including assumptions, but just to make sure you answer the question at hand the best possible way. So I would always come from the business, from a set of business questions, and then answer or ask the question what's necessary and possible with data and analytics to get there.
Great. And if that was unsatisfactory to you, hit
Yeah.
these guys up at the next break, okay?
I kind of wanted to hear from Adam a little bit, but
We'll talk.
we can talk later.
We'll talk.
Yeah, you guys know each other.
Yeah.
Thank you ever so. I really appreciate everyone, and I appreciate your comments and questions. So thank you so much for playing with us.